Okay, good afternoon and to the members of the media. Thanks for coming to our MSJ media conference this afternoon. Thursday, normally we would do it on a Sunday, but it's a long weekend, and there are many issues that are of concern. And though I have been making the media rounds as an individual, thought that we needed to have a major statement by the MSJ on the whole issue of Petrotrin. Let me begin with a few other comments. First, to express our condolences to the family of the late Elie Manette. Elie Manette is a national hero of Trinidad and Tobago, one of the people who invented the steel pan, made many innovations to its development over the years, and was a master tuner. And unfortunately, we didn't have the benefit of Elie being able to pass on all his knowledge to tuners here in Trinidad and Tobago, or develop a whole generation of young tuners, because he was in the United States for many years, working out of the University of West Virginia, and developed an institute up there at that university, which has produced top-class tuners. And regrettably, that's a reflection of Trinidad and Tobago, where we don't seem to know how to use our own resources, be they people resources or physical resources, financial resources, natural resources, and so on, in order to produce goods and services that the entire world would want. And Elie Manette certainly was an example of a person who produced a steel pan and steel pans and knowledge of tuning pans and so on that the world wanted, and still wants, as evidenced by his work in the United States. And it's a pity that here in Trinidad and Tobago we don't understand that. But that perhaps is an indication of the crisis at Petrotrin and the response of the government as well, which I will come to in a moment. Let me also, on behalf of the MSJ, because tomorrow, as we know, is Independence Day, the 56th anniversary of our country's independence, and normally I would simply send out a media release speaking about independence, wishing citizens well, and looking at some of our achievements and some of the challenges, and offering some ideas of vision for the future, including, of course, our vision of a second republic, and explaining why that is necessary as we evolve from independence through the first republic of 1976, and we have to then evolve further to the second republic. But this year I'm not going to be doing an independence message, because the issue of Petrotrin really is at the heart of our understanding as a people and as a country about what independence should mean or not mean, and so on. And so I do want, however, to wish on behalf of the MSJ all of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago a very peaceful Independence Day. Let us use tomorrow to reflect and think carefully about where we are as a nation 56 years after we raised the red, white, and black, after taking down the Union Jack on the evening of 31st of August 1962. Let's think about where are we as a nation, and are we, as we look ourselves in the mirror, are we happy with what we see as a nation that is supposed to be independent, and so on. I think tomorrow could be used for very serious introspection and a recognition that really and truly we are in many respects going backwards as a country rather than going forward as an independent country and as an independent people. And we therefore need to think in a way that is independent, that reflects that adage that we sing in the song, that we need to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery and so on. And if we do that, then we can become truly independent as a people and chart our own destiny. And we are not doing that, and the Petrotrin story tells us clearly about that. So let me go straight into that and say, first of all, that the Movement for Social Justice stands completely in solidarity with the Petrotrin workers, not only the 3,500 permanent workers, but the many hundreds of temporary workers and casual workers, people who work in the contract industry and the energy services sector, who are going to be affected, both the business owners and the people they employ in that sector, who are going to be adversely affected by this decision by the board, which was announced on Tuesday. We stand in solidarity with them because it is very clear that there's going to be a humongous impact, which is going to be negative, not just on the lives of people, but on the businesses and the whole economic activity, not only in South Trinidad, but really throughout the country as a whole, as I was explaining in a moment. Let me also say that, therefore, we stand in solidarity with the union, the Oilfield Workers Trade Union, as it seeks to have this decision reversed, as it fights to have alternative options for the future of Petrotrin seriously considered by the board and by the government, which options have not been considered at all by the board or by the government in any serious way. And so we stand in solidarity with the union as it fights not just for its members or to save Petrotrin as a company, but really stands in defense of the national interests of Trinidad and Tobago, as it has done for decades from 1937 to the present time. Because without the struggles of oil workers and the Oilfield Workers Trade Union, we would not have the right to vote, we would not have democracy, we would not have independence, we would not have nationals being able to aspire to any job, be it in government or in industry, and so on, because those barriers to ordinary people of African and Indian descent primarily, those who came out of slavery and through indenture, those barriers to advancement were broken by the struggle led by the labor movement, and in particular led by the Oilfield Workers Trade Union. And so to all of those who wish to denigrate and attack and so on, who are now enjoying a lifestyle or enjoying benefits, whether it is terms and conditions of employment or wages and pension or medical plans or any of those things, or just the right to vote or the right to be able to be promoted beyond the position of a foreman or a supervisor in a workplace and go to the position of a managing director and so on. All of those battles were fought for not by the PNM or anybody else, certainly not the UNC, which didn't exist at that time, but were fought for by ordinary working people in the labor movement, and in the forefront of that was the Oilfield Workers Trade Union. And therefore, a tremendous amount of gratitude and respect ought to be demonstrated and shown to the union and to workers for the advancement that have been made over the years as a result of sacrifice. People lost their jobs, people lost pay, people in some cases lost their lives and so on. People went to jail and all kinds of other things so that others would benefit, and we have to pay respect to that, and the MSJ recognizes, coming out of the experience of a fight for social justice, we know that history of the struggle for social justice and the role that labor played and workers played to lead the fight for social justice in this country, because the parties never fought that fight. Neither the PNM nor the UNC fought the fight for social justice in the country. It was the labor movement that fought that fight, and the Oilfield Workers Trade Union was front and center in the vanguard of that historic battle over the years, and we respect that, and we stand in solidarity with them at this moment. So that's just one part of the statement that I want to make with respect to where the MSJ stands, and it is very clear that the MSJ is the only party that, not just in this instance of Petrotrin, but in other struggles, has stood consistently foursquare with workers and the trade union movement, farmers, ordinary people in their communities in their struggle for justice. None of the other parties have done that. But the MSJ is very clear that that is where we stand, and therefore workers will know whom they could trust going forward to provide proper leadership for this country. They know, therefore, they could trust the MSJ because we have stood consistently on principle, on the basis of integrity, for social justice, on end to discrimination, and for fairness in this country, for a better life for all. The other parties represent a better life for a few and to fill their own pockets, or just trying to get in power for power's sake. So workers will judge us. I'm sure they'll judge us in that way, because they know that they could trust us, but they can't trust anybody else. Now, independence and the Petrotrin story. Many people in the country have been completely baffled, including the editorial writers and so on, some of the business organizations, some of the commentators, about what precipitated this decision to not simply close the refinery, that is just one element of what has been announced by the board, but to retrench, to sever all 3,500 permanent workers, not, of course, including the temporaries and so on, sever everybody, and then to get people to apply for some 800 jobs in exploration and production, which includes land and Trinma, which means if you look at the total workforce in land and Trinma, that exceeds 800, and then some 200 jobs in what is known as terminaling. And I saw a typographical error in one of the newspapers, not understanding the term, terminaling, which is the operations of the port and the tank farm and moving product from ships onto land and moving products from land onto ships. Clyde Callender, who is our international relations officer in the executive, worked in that area for some 40 years plus? 41 years. He worked in oil stocks, which is part of what is now, and custody transfer, which is now what would be known as part of the terminaling operation. So he knows that inside out and back again. So that decision by the Petrotrin board, what provoked it? Because Mr. Espinay, as we have said before, Mr. Riley, Mr. Lashley, all of whom are involved in the board and running the company right now, Mr. Leroy Myers, were all part of the report, which is popularly known as the Lashley Committee because he was the chairman of the committee, which was a committee to review Petrotrin, and which submitted the report on the 1st of June last year to the Prime Minister, and which had been set up in early April of last year. And I was a member of that committee nominated by the Oilfields Workers Trade Union, as was Mr. Gregory Marchand. Another member of the committee was Mrs. Helen Drayton. And absolutely nowhere in this report was there any suggestion of any need for the closure of the Point-à-Pierre refinery. Nowhere was there any suggestion for mass retrenchment, for severing all the workers, and so on. Nowhere in this report was there any recommendation or suggestion of that kind. And I want to say that the same foreign consultants that Espinay et al. Brought into the Petrotrin in the last year to give them recommendations about the refinery and so on, McKinsey, Solomon, and these people had submitted, because Petrotrin previous to that had contracted these same consultants, and they had submitted reports dated 2016. Now, not much would have changed between 2016 and 2018. And the same McKinsey report, and this is a list of the appendices to the report. This appendix 1 is a list of documents reviewed by the team. Number 1, McKinsey report. Coming down, action plan detailing activities to address issues identified in the Solomon report. Solomon report for R&M, which is refining and maintenance. So all of the information that Espinay and Riley and they claimed they got when they became board members would have been available to them a year ago when they were members of the committee. I'm not now going to go into the fact that they were very deceitful by taking up a board appointment, which board appointment was inconsistent with the recommendation that they themselves had made as a committee about how the board should be appointed. And I spoke about that when I was offered, and I had a media conference, because you know I was offered a position on the board and I turned it down exactly 1 year ago. Because it was on August 29th last year that the Prime Minister called to ask me to serve on the Petrotrin board, and I sent him some text messages asking whether the board would be appointed consistent, and subsequent, before we end, I'll read all the text messages, which I did to the media a year ago, but I'll read them again. And the next day, I replied in the morning of the 30th of August, exactly a year ago today. I indicated why I could not, on principle, accept a board appointment, because the appointment of the board was inconsistent with the recommendation that we made as a committee, because we only made 2 recommendations, right? Only 2. One recommendation was governance arrangements, and I'll read it out again for you. Do you want me to read it now? Yes? governance arrangements to enable the company to have a consistent focused mandate, facilitate long-term planning, and avoid the frequent changes in board and management. We recommend A, the members of the board of directors are selected through a process which provides for comprehensive and transparent input and feedback from key stakeholders to ensure that members possess the relevant experience and capabilities to address priority matters critical to the transformation and sustainable development of the company. B, Petrotrin adopts and adheres to the laws and regulations that apply to publicly listed companies, especially with respect to transparency and accountability. C, Petrotrin adopts a policy whereby the board of directors' terms of office are cycled in such a manner as to ensure that at all times there is continuity of membership of at least 50% of the board. So that when a government changes or a minister changes, you don't have a new board. You have continuity of planning, of management, of leadership of the company, and so on. 2, organizational structure. To enable the executive and senior management to focus on strategic and operational responsibilities of managing profitable businesses for which they will be held accountable, we recommend A, the establishment of 3 operationally independent business units, namely TRINMA, Land Exploration and Production, Refining and Marketing, which actually almost coincides with what the union has proposed. Union wanted a 4th one, which was the hospital, but essentially it is the same. B, that each of these business units be led and managed by persons who would be responsible for organizing all the resources, financial, human, physical, within the unit in order to achieve the established targets and be held accountable for the business performance. C, that the office of the president of the company be accountable for ensuring the implementation of policy across all business units, providing oversight and strategic leadership of the company. Those are the 2 recommendations that we made. Nothing to do with sending home workers, nothing to do with closure of the refinery. In fact, within the text of the report, we said that if these changes in governance and management are not put in place, then the other issues raised, for example, debt and all those things, will not be properly addressed. Went on to say in different parts of the report that, that the issues with respect to things like, okay, so let me just look for the exact quote. I don't want to say something. I want to actually quote it so the media has it, but I have to look for different pages. I didn't flag all my pages, unfortunately, so I just find it. Okay. The factors contributing to the increasing annual operational expenditures and eroding the company's margins include inefficiencies in operations, poor management of shift personnel and high overtime, poor asset integrity resulting in shutdowns and loss of revenues, inefficiencies in risk management, increasing debt, weak project management skills, inventory management, and low productivity, among other markers of underperformance. Whether in periods of high or low oil prices, the model of operations is not sustainable. A deeper investigation would identify the specific management and governance issues accountable for the company's poor performance. That is what Espinay and Robert Riley and Selwyn Lashley all said was the problem in Petrotrin. And they said, so you had to address those issues. And they did not, all of those things deal with management and so on. All of them deal with management. And there's another quote which was interesting where they say that one shouldn't identify to the problem of things like overtime and wages and so on. They said that is not the root cause, it's a symptom of the problem, right? And we also went to say that, so let me make this point. The Petrotrin is a large and complex and unwieldy entity that frequently has had senior management changes and mandates. The company has had to implement elements of government's policy while seeking to retain its core mandate as a commercial enterprise. This hybrid suffers and continues to be plagued with an identity crisis that needs urgent correction, clarification, and structural intervention. The confusion of purpose has led to a collapse of governance, a lack of transparency in performance and accountability, resulted in the company's performance falling to the bottom benchmarks of comparable companies in the industry, and so on. Further impediments to the company's commercial success have resulted from frequent changes in board and management, etc. Right? And so what they're saying here is that, going on to say, Petrotrin's complex organization makes the company difficult to manage and creates conflicting mandates, hence the need to create separate business units. Not closing down, to create separate business units. Even the structures of large multinational companies such as BP, Shell, and Exxon are not aggregated like Petrotrin's. It creates ambiguity, lack of transparency of underlying problems, and at best diffuses accountability. These multinationals find it difficult to identify senior management who have tested knowledge and experience to manage the upstream and midstream businesses. Such talent is scarce and difficult to attract. So with the current state of affairs, it is unrealistic to expect that Petrotrin can sustainably attract and retain senior management who have the ability to turn around and successfully manage a large, complex set of commercial activities, and so on. This aggregation is therefore necessary to form more manageable business units and to facilitate a higher level of transparency, leadership, and accountability, etc., etc. So that was the prognosis. The problem was governance, in other words, governments, UNC and PNM, interfere with the company and made bad decisions which have saddled the company with problems. And secondly, the structure of the company was too unwieldy, hence the need to have these different business units. Those were the recommendations and findings of a year ago. So what now has prompted the same people who, as I said, deceitfully took up a board position, and not only took up a board position, but are now executive managers of Petrotrin. So Espinier is executive chairman, Riley is running exploration and production, and so on. Chantak, who was not a member of the committee, is running refinery as a member of the board. So what has prompted this sudden, abrupt decision to not just close the refinery, but to send home everybody, and so on, without any plan? So look in today's newspapers, and reporters have asked the company, where they're going to import fuel from? They don't know. Franklin Khan was asked that this morning on television. Don't know. Where are you getting the money from to pay workers whatever severance benefits are due? They don't know. They have to borrow. They don't know. They don't know anything because there is no plan. There is no plan. There was no plan in relation to closing down Petrotrin. There was no plan. How are you going to get the money to invest in exploration and production, to get production up? I see one person saying up to 60,000 barrels of oil a day. Where are you getting the money from? They don't know. Or if they know that there's some private company out there that they partner with that they don't want to say yet because they think that will raise another red flag. So this thing was not planned, totally unplanned. And therefore, it is a knee-jerk reaction. And knee-jerk reactions are simply madness. Anything that you're doing with something as strategic as Petrotrin in a knee-jerk way is madness. Now, what prompted this knee-jerk reaction? And the old saying, mouth open, Tory jump out. Yesterday I heard on I-95.5, and you could check it back on the Dale and Tony show, they were interviewing Mr. Espinier, and Mr. Espinier was being pressed. Why now? Why all of a sudden? And so on. Because if you check back the announcement of the board a year ago by the Prime Minister, the statement was that the board has been given a mandate to make Petrotrin viable and sustainable within a 2 to 3 year period. That was the time frame for restructuring and so on. That is why they entered into that memorandum agreement with the union to discuss the new structure. And when I read the text message from the Prime Minister, when I asked him what would the board's responsibility would be a year ago, on the 29th of August when he replied to me a year ago, he said the mandate would be to implement the findings of this committee. So none of which have to do with closing down. So what prompts it? The country has to know what prompts it. And it is our belief that what prompts it, based on what Espinier said yesterday, in that interview on I-95 in the morning program, he said that Petrotrin was being harassed, pestered, asked every day, whatever. by the ratings agencies like Standards and Poor's and Fitch and Moody's and so on, how are you going to pay the bullet payment of $850 million US dollars, which is due next year, August? Now, that debt is not payable until August next year, a whole year from now. But the ratings agencies, according to Espionage, were harassing the company. How are you going to pay that debt a year from now? And Espionage was saying, if they did not give a proper answer in what the agencies would think as a proper answer, then the ratings agencies would have downgraded Petrotrin. And if Petrotrin got a credit downgrade, then Trinidad and Tobago would get a downgrade by Moody's and Standards and Poor's. And Espionage went on to say the implications of that would be bad for Trinidad and Tobago. So, my understanding is that what prompted this sudden, abrupt, unplanned, crazy, wrong, bad decision announced by the board was the fear of a downgrade by Moody's, Standards and Poor's, and the international ratings agencies. So here we have a situation where on the eve of independence, major national patrimony of Petrotrin, supporting significant part of our gross domestic product, our national income, which contributed between 2011 and 2015 more than $20 billion in taxes to the country. Decision is taken. Petrotrin, which sits on hundreds of millions of barrels of oil. Petrotrin's licensed acreages contain hundreds of millions of barrels of oil. Decision is taken without thought, without plan, to simply jump to the tune of Standards and Poor's and Moody's to avoid a credit downgrade. So send home 3,500 permanent workers, however many 100 temporary workers, dislocate businesses in South, dislocate families, create social chaos and so on, because some little boys up in New York City who claim to be big finance experts in international credit and so on say that our credit rating will go down. And Trinidad and Tobago, independent country 56 years afterwards with 100 and something years of experience in the oil industry, jumping to the tune of Standards and Poor's and Moody's, to the detriment of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. That, in my view, is a complete abdication of responsibility, and the government will say otherwise. They say, if we don't do it, then the implications are this, that, and the other, and so on. But what we are doing is abdicating our sovereign responsibility as an independent country to decide how we want to organize our resources for the best use of all the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Because the preamble to the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago states that the material resources must subserve the common good, not the good as identified by the neoliberal capitalism, free market capitalism of Wall Street, which free market capitalism of Wall Street has created the greatest inequalities of the last century. And it's not just David Abdullah saying so, it is Warren Buffett, who was one of the richest men in the world, saying so. It is Bill Gates, one of the richest men in the world, saying so. George Soros, one of the richest men in the world, saying so. Go and Google them. All of them are saying that inequality is one of the greatest threats to modern civilization. Nobel economist Joseph Stiglitz says the same thing, price of inequality. And it is that kind of neoliberal economic thinking that has dominated IMF kind of conditionalities of austerity, of making workers pay for a crisis that was not of their making. So Patrick Manning and Malcolm Jones et al. Ran up billions of US dollars in debt in the refinery. That is what Petrotrin's debt is. Patrick Manning and Malcolm Jones and others and others who were on the standing committee, and Dr. Rowley was a member of the cabinet when those decisions were being taken, if not a member of the standing committee on energy at that time, running up billions of dollars in debt, and so on, in US dollars. And who has to pay the price? Workers and communities and ordinary people, business people, and so on. Because we have given up our independence on the eve of independence and jumping to the tune of Moody's and Standards & Poor's. But we should take a leaf out of Barbados' book, because Mia Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados, coming into a situation of great economic difficulty in Barbados, of debt, much bigger debt than Trinidad and Tobago. Barbados' debt is over 100% of GDP. Ours is 60%. But Barbados' debt is much bigger than ours, and so on. The resource base is much smaller, human resource base smaller, physical resource base smaller. They don't have oil and natural gas and petrochemical industries and all of those things, and so on. And Miss Motley said that they were going to suspend their debt payments, and many of their debt payments, unlike Trinidad and Tobago, to international debt creditors, whereas ours are primarily to local creditors. They suspended their debt payments, and their credit rating crashed. But she said, we are not concerned about our credit rating and Standards & Poor's and Moody's. What we are concerned about is coming up with a national recovery plan which all Barbadians can buy into and understand, and so on, and the sacrifices that have to be made in order to bring about future growth and prosperity and a better life for everybody in Barbados. So she was prepared to not worry about and not dance to the tune of the ratings agencies, because when you decide not to pay your debt, the ratings agencies say your credit is downgraded to junk. That is what happens. I understand those things as well, so that is what happens. But she was not concerned about that. Her concern was, how do we get all of Barbados to work together for a better Barbados? This government and people like SPDA, who don't care about people in Trinidad and Tobago. SPDA has his millions of dollars banked abroad and probably has property abroad, and Robert Riley lives in London and whatever else and so on. So they don't really care. They don't really care about the ordinary people of Trinidad and Tobago. We will say that, but they're crying crocodile tears. They haven't even worked out how they're dealing with the problem. And then I heard one minister of government this morning on television saying, we're going to increase, hear what they're saying? We're going to increase the public sector investment program in the coming budget to try to soften the blow to communities in the Deep South. So what is that meaning? The government saying taxpayers mustn't help out Petrotrin, but taxpayers' money will be put into the PSIP, according to the Minister in the Ministry of Finance, put into the PSIP in this budget to spend on projects like what? Road repairs, bridge building, and so on, short-term employment, more URP, more CPEP, to replace a $20 billion activity, which is Petrotrin, sustainable jobs of highly skilled people, professionals, technical workers, and so on. Highly skilled, we're destroying that skill base to replace that with what? PSIP, make work, 10 days work. That is the vision that this PNM government has for this country, and so on. So they have no plan, and they're jumping to the tune of Standards & Poor's and Moody's, the ratings agencies, and they have sold out our independence on the eve of the 56th anniversary of our independence to these little white boys, or whatever kind of boys and girls they are, maybe they're not all white, these little boys and girls operating out of Wall Street who want to determine what our future should be. Well, MSJ says that with an MSJ government, while we are very mindful of the globalization and all of those things, I know about all of those things and the implications of all of those things, but at the same time, decisions must be based, first of all, on vision for where we want Trinidad and Tobago to go, and then action that will lead us towards that vision. That is what it has to be, and in the interest and well-being of everybody, and ensuring that we retain our patrimony and our sense of ownership of this country, not just through state enterprises, but that all of us have a stake in Trinidad and Tobago, and that we make our own decisions, and we are not going to be dictated to by what somebody on Wall Street says must happen to us, because that is not independence. So MSJ demarcates ourselves from the PNM and the UNC and all of them who always jump to that, and all the neoliberal economists who jump to that tune and so on. And they could call us whatever they want to call us, but where we stand is for the people and for social justice and an MSJ government. That is what we would do if we were in government. And we have many alternative plans. I don't have time to go into that now. If you ask me, I will deal with that, but I wanted to focus on some fundamental questions. And the alternative, I've talked about that in the media, about how Petrotrin could have been saved, because Petrotrin could have been and can still be saved. Not in the exact way in which it's functioning now, because everybody knows it can't continue the way it was functioning up to yesterday or Tuesday and so on, but with changes. But it can certainly be saved. I mean, take the easy way out, capitulate to Moody's and Standards and Poor's, send home everybody, because that's the easy way, because they don't want to do the hard work of trying to come up with the ideas to transform Petrotrin, in the same way that no government has done the hard work to do the diversification. And when they set up the EDAB to do that work, they then ignored what we were doing because that required hard work. Not prepared to do the hard work because they have no ideas, they're lazy, they're bereft of ideas, they're bereft of vision. And let me say, repeat the proverb which I have been using, which is that vision without action is daydreaming, but worse, action without vision is a nightmare. And we have a nightmare in Trinidad and Tobago, and we have been having a nightmare for many different governments because they lack vision. All they're interested in is staying in power or winning power and in filling their pockets, some of them. And that is all they're interested in, and not interested in building Trinidad and Tobago into a sustainable nation. All right, well, I'm sure you asked Mr. Roger that question this morning, because there was a media conference. I was not in the meeting with the Prime Minister and so on. So I don't know exactly what was said in that meeting. I can't speak to that. You have to ask Mr. Roger exactly what transpired in that meeting and so on. But if you look at what the statement coming out of the Minister of Trade, who gave the press statement on behalf of the government after that meeting, she did not indicate in any way that the union was told that there was going to be this huge change. And all she said, it was a good meeting, there were differences of views, but it was a good meeting, and that the board would then inform the union of the decision that the board had taken, which the government had accepted. That is, so go back and look at what that statement by the Minister of Trade coming out of that media conference. But you have to ask Mr. Roger, those who are in the room. I was not in the room. Yes, Cindy.
Saying that the decision was based on the fear of a downgrade is based on what? Because I just want to clarify, because they didn't say that that was the reason. They said it was based on research in terms of in what way the company can move forward. So what are you basing that?
On his statement on I-95 yesterday morning. Because all of the documentation that we had a year ago, which is the same documentation that the board would have had before it, pointed to ways of reorganizing Petrotrin to make it viable. Not in 3 months or 6 months, but within a time frame. When asked about why the timing, why now, and in this form, he said that they had to satisfy the ratings agencies that they were doing something very significant. I don't want to give you the exact words, but I'm paraphrasing for what I heard. Very significant to satisfy the ratings agencies that something significant enough was going to be done that would enable the new Petrotrin, or whatever you want to call it, to pay that bullet payment in a year's time. And they had to satisfy them no, which is why they had to act no. That is what he said on radio yesterday, and if perhaps you could go back and pull up that clip, and I'm basing it on that. I heard it with my own ears, and I'm absolutely certain, therefore, that that was the trigger for this unplanned, crazy decision.
This morning, Mr. Roger said that they're aware that the Venezuelan government offered an alliance with our government in a way to move forward with Petrotrin, because they were concerned about the plans for Petrotrin, and that time the announcement was not made. Are you aware of that? And can you shed a little more light?
There was somebody who was interested in
Okay, let me say that when I was on the Economic Development Advisory Board, and I have to look for the note that was sent to the Prime Minister, because you know we sent a number of notes. I don't have it in front of me, so I have it on my computer. I was to print it, but because I got it a bit late. That we did advise in that note that there were very important synergies between Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago. One was Dragon, which has now been finalized. Other cross-border fields which have been talked about, Lorraine Manatee and the others and so on. But there were also synergies with respect to the Trinidad and Tobago refinery and Venezuelan crude and various kinds of commercial arrangements that could have been worked out in terms of the Petrotrin arrangement that Venezuela has with other Caribbean countries at the time, and so on and so on and so on. So, and I was very involved in working on that particular advice to the Prime Minister, and which also involved the supply of manufactured goods out of Trinidad and Tobago to Venezuela, and the use of things like not barter, but working around having to make large US dollar payments either by Venezuela for manufactured goods or Trinidad and Tobago for oil out of Venezuela, that other arrangements could be made to offset one against the other, and so on, that we were going to explore further had we been given the green light. So I'm well aware that there are synergies that are possible. I don't want to go any further by saying I'm aware of anything else, but I'm aware of advice that would have been given to the Prime Minister, when was that, 2016, about synergies, but which advice, apart from the Dragon field, seemed not to have been pursued with any interest and so on. So there are synergies, and all of these are options that could be explored rather than closing down the refinery. Yes? Rather than closing down the refinery. For example, where are we going to get bitumen from to do road paving? None of those things are being worked out. Nothing has been thought through or worked out.
I mean that this situation has the potential to trigger civil unrest in our country.
By civil unrest, define what you mean by that before I say yes or no to that. So if you want to define that radical for me.
Social unrest, communities uprising,
Okay, two things. One is quite clearly a decision like this, and in the way in which it was made, handed down from on high, in colonial style, certainly, as you have seen from reactions by trade unions and others and so on, will trigger various forms of what I would call disciplined mass actions, protest actions, which are peaceful by trade unions and other interest groups. There's no doubt about that. As they seek to use their people power to force a few people, Espinay and a few people who don't represent anybody, a few people, to cause them to change the position that they've taken. And so people power, united people power, can trump the decisions of a few people, no matter how powerful they think they are. What I also know is that the social conditions of people in South Trinidad will be severely impacted upon by the decision that was announced. Because not only the closure of the refinery and the sending home of the refinery workers, but hundreds of workers in E&P will also go home, and so on. And so the economic activity in the communities, fence line communities and so on, that is supported by Petrotrin's activity will also be affected. So if you have a hardware store, just for example, that sells goods to Petrotrin, and that hardware store employs people from Marbella and so on, those people then get laid off. What do you expect to happen? So the situation of crime and violence and a sense of hopelessness which this has engendered, hopelessness which it engenders, will aggravate the social problems of crime and alienation that already exist, and trauma and anger and frustration, all of those things will be aggravated by this decision.
So these synergies you talked about earlier, would that be other countries, other governments?
There will have to be discussions at a governmental level and then at a company-to-company level between PDVSA and Petrotrin. Yeah, in other words, what clearly did not happen is that without a vision, you see, all you're seeing is numbers. So you see a bottom line and say, well, we're losing money. And some of the figures banded about $25 billion needed right now to save Petrotrin. That is just not true. Those are figures being thrown out by the government as scare tactics to frighten people or to get people to buy into the story that they have to close it down. It's scare tactics, but not true. You can't spend $25 billion in a year. You can't. All of the refinery upgrade projects that were built don't total $25 billion. So that just is a nonsense. The total debt of Petrotrin is not $25 billion. And all the debt is not due this year or next year or within 3 years. It's spaced out over time. You can't repair all the pipelines in 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. That takes time because you have to mobilize resources and all of that. So the spending has to be over a period of time. And I made the point at our last press media conference when I was dealing with the disasters, natural disasters. You will recall that I said, although it didn't get reported because I know I said a lot, so I'm not blaming you, that I also spoke about that national reconstruction plan to deal with asset integrity of Petrotrin, if you recall, because you could mobilize the companies in the energy services sector together with Petrotrin workers, together with people who are now unemployed, with mobilizing financial resources to do all that pipeline change out and tank change out and all those other things that are necessary. And that will stimulate growth, create jobs, give people hope, and all of that. So the ideas are out there. We have put forward those ideas, but I come back to say action without vision is a nightmare.
David, you were hearing while assigned to phase down in Venezuela with Prime Minister and the army, right? You were hearing that there was a financier who was willing to pay all this bullet debt. Do you know of any?
No, and there'll be all kind of rumors going around the place, but I didn't hear of anybody willing to absorb, pay off that debt, or what would they have gotten in return?
Because they were looking at the refinery.
I don't know. There are all kind of rumors flying about.
You're not saying rumor, but it came from when that signing took place.
No, I wouldn't. The Venezuelan government or the PDVSA would not be in a position to locate $850 million US to pay that debt and then take over the refinery. No, that wasn't the kind of synergy that is possible. The synergies are about being able to utilize the Point-of-Care refinery with crude coming out of Venezuela perhaps, either on a processing fee basis, which means that you don't pay Venezuela for the crude, but that Venezuela pays for every barrel of crude that is refined and then Venezuela gets back the product to sell up the islands or do whatever. Those are there are synergies that are possible. There are synergies that are possible, right? But it's not about either sourcing product out of Venezuela because you're closing the refinery, nor is it about Venezuela coming in and somehow taking control or anything like that. But there are synergies that are beneficial in the same way that Dragon is beneficial to both because you're monetizing gas, so Venezuela gets a benefit, we get a benefit, and so on. There are synergies that are beneficial. But that is when you need to explore all your different options for the future of a company. But Espina, they don't know about exploring options. The only thing they know about is saying, well, boy, the bottom line ain't looking good, because that's how they operate a private business, so we close it down. That's how BP operates. So BP sending home workers, even though BP making billions of dollars in profit, they send home workers. That is the mentality. So when you bring that mentality to the table, all you think about is sending home people, and because you have to increase your profit. You don't think about other options to maximize the assets to generate wealth and benefits for the country of Trinidad and Tobago. Sure. Dealing with the synergies between Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago. And I was going to just read the text message. I'm not going to read all the text, but I'll just read one part of the text for you from between the Prime Minister and myself a year ago, if I could find it, where he said what the mandate of the company would be.
No.
Yeah, we can't. I around long time, you know.